So while they put up my slides, please permit me to return the favor to Pastor Ben Akabeze, who, doesn't need an introduction in his own domain and parish, but I must say that like I said when I think I was here last year as well, and I made, and I think I'll just repeat the same phrase. I have a lot of time for him. When I got the invitation, I knew I had to juggle things to be here, but I'm very glad. I actually think it's a miracle that I'm here, because there's a meeting that came late in the day, called by the president at, early to mid-afternoon, and it was a meeting I definitely had to be at. But the way God works, provided transportation, just miraculously, and somehow I'm here, not terribly late. Please forgive me for being a bit late. I want to appreciate all the people that make this, event and this set of this experience we're going to have over this weekend possible. From the distinguished cast of speakers, including my dear friend and our, I was going to call him motivator, really, Brett Johnson, to all the other cast of speakers, very distinguished speakers, as well as the organizers, as well as the, members of this church and the delegates and people that are here. So I welcome you all. What I thought I would do is, if you permit me to, because I know we're going to have some, if you've looked at the program, you see that after I present, there'll be some kind of panel. So I'm going to try and almost look at this topic from a number of perspectives, with a view to creating the context for the dialogue that will ensue and the Q&A that will follow. And we hope we'll then lay the foundation, frankly, for the weekend, in terms of the topic. I don't know. Okay, you're going to direct it from there? It works. Okay. I just point it up there. Okay. Well, but if you can. Okay, please just move to the outline. Thank you. I think for those of you, I hope we can all see the slides and can hear me. I thought I should cover the following with us. This is about partnership. The topic, of course, is partnering for kingdom impact in Africa. So I thought we should reflect a bit on why partnership is so important and why it's better that we partner than we move alone. And then I want to share some thoughts on impact, because particularly now that I'm in public service, I've been meditating and reflecting a lot on this topic of impact. And it's something I just want to share some of my own meditations with you so that it will hopefully provoke your own thinking. And of course, I want us to look at some of the kingdom impact spheres or areas where we should be making an impact. And I think this presentation will be incomplete if I don't at least give you an update on some of the things we're doing in government in a way that would serve as some kind of communication and feedback to this very distinguished audience, and then I'll conclude. Like I said, my objective is to set the tone, lay the basis for us to then have what I hope will be a very meaningful and engaging discussion. I hope that none of the things I'll be saying will be new to you in the sense of like, oh, I haven't had it before. But I hope it will cause us to think and meditate and reflect on why we're gathered here, because I honestly believe we can do a lot more than we have done, and that God, by the grace of God, we will. Why does partnership matter? There is no question that one of the things I've been reflecting on lately is, I call it how not to squander the grace of God. How not to squander the grace of God. And every time I meditate on this, as God gives you opportunity to serve, to do things, it becomes clear that one of the most important things that God really values is unity, particularly unity amongst the brethren. Whenever there is strife and divisions and misunderstanding, it creates all kinds of problems that I won't have enough time to cover today. And as the Bible tells us in Psalm 133, it's in the midst of unity that God commands his blessing. It doesn't matter whose fault it is when there is no unity. The important thing is that the blessing generally tends to be present when the unity is there. And the converse is also true. And of course, we know the story of the Tower of Babel, where that very thought-provoking statement was made, that if these people speak with one language And if they are one and they speak with one language, they can accomplish almost anything. In fact, it says they can accomplish anything. That's actually quite massive. Could that be the secret formula, the secret sauce? That if we can speak with one voice, or if we can be one, meaning united, and speak with one language, one voice, meaning that we have a vision that we're united, that we can go very far. Even when the Lord himself prayed for his disciples, starting this ministry that is now Christianity all over the world, at the very beginning, it's interesting to look at the one prayer he prayed was a prayer for unity. The Lord prayed that they may be one, that the world may believe us, and that the movement may be credible. And of course, you know what the Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, 2 are better than one, a threefold cord is not easily broken. All speaking about this theme of pulling together rather than pulling apart. And let me share something with you that why I think this is so important. And I learned this from our mentor. Some of us have seen Shego Lujobi here, and there might be others from that whole Anderson background. Dick Kramer, who is still around and mentored all of us, always points out that, that he's found out in Nigeria there's a tendency for people to want to do their own things, start new things. So why can't we pull together? Every time somebody comes up with a very original idea, and he wants to do it afresh. But, most of the time you find that there is another group already doing the same thing. The question is, can we really pull together so we can have an impact as opposed to, the narrow things we're doing? And I just want to challenge us to say, how can we pull together, to have this kingdom impact that is so solid in there. Now, of course, the opposite of this is also true. That, and when the Bible says God hates divorce, I think it's not just in marriage, but it's generally speaking. Of course, it was related to marriage, but it's very important to understand that that's also a principle. I remember one of my previous pastors saying, he said something quite aggressive, a very aggressive statement, that every time you find a man maltreating his wife or not, treating his marriage well, that it generally affects everything else, including their careers. Now, that's not to say that everybody that is separated is cursed, but there's just something about unity, particularly in marriage, which I'll get to when I talk about family, that we shouldn't take for granted. Let me just share a few thoughts on impact. Like I said, I've been thinking a lot about this challenge of impact, this challenge of making a difference, making a contribution in a meaningful way, a lot. And what I would do is just share some thoughts with you that are not meant to be conclusive, they're meant to be thought-provoking and hopefully get us to reflect. One of the ones that is of great importance to us, and I would say certainly to me, is this difference between doing and hearing. It's as if we have almost believed in a lie in Nigeria. I don't know about other places, but in Nigeria, people really value talk. The way people just win arguments and act as if they've won the prize, and they just run away with it. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's as if we have believed in a lie. Why are we so persuaded by people speaking things they don't intend to do, they haven't done, probably can't even do, but they can articulate it so well, they're so inspired, and it's causing all kinds of problems, as you know. There's a lot of populism, there's a lot of conventional wisdom and talk. Of course, social media is. Think about this as kingdom citizens. I often want to think about it in the context of biblical wisdom. Particularly what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27, where he says that, the man that is wise is, which he likened to building your house on a rock, is if you hear my word and you do it. And then he said, he likened the foolish man to the man that had and did not do. And of course, he even went as far as saying that it's even better to say you won't do than do. If you must make a choice, then say with your mouth the opposite, but make sure you do the right thing. Doing is a big deal. And that's what the parable of the two sons in Matthew 21, 28, 31 illustrates. And I say this because whether it's to us as individuals or as a group, I am fully persuaded. Because, people are always asking for something new. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We came up with this economic recovery and growth plan. And I've never really, everybody says, what's new? And I was telling my colleague, who sort of is the focal minister on it, as Senator Udoma, that why do you have to persuade people that the document is entirely new? Why don't you focus on persuading them that you will act with more integrity in doing whatever you say? It may even be less sort of ambitious than previous documents. But let's get it done. Let's actually get on with doing it. But of course, people kept saying it's the same, Nigeria, we're not coming up with new ideas. As if the old ideas were done and they failed. They were not done. We talked about them, but we didn't do them. So I think this is important when it comes to having impact. And as individuals, I want to challenge us, to people that do. I'll give you another example of this. I've been reading a book. My colleague is here, Bumi Adeoye, and he actually recommended the book to me called Seeking Wisdom, written by a gentleman looking at the lives of people who have manifested wisdom both in times past and in present. And one of the gentlemen there that he talked about, Charles Munger, who is a partner to Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, and I will speak briefly about him later, said something that was, he gave a talk at Harvard Law School on if you wanted to be miserable. What is it that, if you do, it guarantees you a life of misery? He covered like 5 subjects, and I know many of you would like to know what they are, but I'll focus on only one because that's not my topic for today. You can come and see me afterwards, I'll tell you the rest, or you buy the book. But one of the topic, he said, if you want to be miserable, be unreliable. He said, if you're unreliable, I can't guarantee you that anything else you do, no, the converse actually. He said, if you are reliable, I can't guarantee you that anything else can make you miserable. And he gave an example of a roommate he had who had all kinds of problems, but the man was just a pillar of reliability. His word meant everything to him. The man became a CEO. Despite all, I think he had all kinds of medical complications. He said, if a man is reliable, I cannot guarantee that even if you did everything else wrong, that you'll be miserable. So if you really want to be miserable, please be unreliable. Because nothing else can guarantee misery as much as being unreliable. And yet we go about being unreliable, without knowing that it's a sure path to misery. A miserable life. May God help us in Jesus' name. What about mastering opportunity, which is really, what I've been reflecting on the most. In the interest of time, I won't go through them. I decided that I'll just mention the things, that you probably will be aware of. That if you really want to master opportunity, there are some things you must know about the theme and the concept of opportunity. One of the most important is opportunity almost always comes disguised in the form of adversity, challenges, whatever. Very few opportunities come dressed as opportunities and screaming, opportunity. No. They come as something else, and then in grappling with it, you find that a breakthrough could come from that, And then the other one is that opportunity is best mastered by those that have a passion, a burden, and are focused. The subject of focus is a big one. I won't go through it today. Closely linked to that is purpose. That when people work in their area of calling and purpose and mission and passion and all those good things, they're much more likely to get there. And talking about church, what about this spirituality, being spirit-led, being in partnership with God? We won't talk about partnership. Of course, I'm sure I'm not being religious if I say the most important partnership you can have is the one you have with God. And I'm not saying it just to sound religious. And the way that manifests is walking in the Spirit or having a walk with God. Because really, if people learn to hear God and walk with God, it makes all the difference. I certainly believe that the singular most important thing that has helped me personally is knowing God and learning to walk with Him, which is still a journey of faith. But I can't think of anything that comes even a close second. By the way, as I think, Warren Buffett or Charles Munger also said something about some of the best things you will encounter will be a clear first, and the second will be by far very distant. Whether it's people, whether it's ideas that really work, and this is one of those ones where God is all by Himself. Nobody comes even close. And of course, closely linked to working with God is obedience, which is the same reliability theme we've covered. And then I told you I've been meditating on what it takes not to squander the grace of God. I won't go through all that today. But this is just to say there is a way to master opportunity. There's a way to have impact. There's a science to it. There's a way you do it, and it's much more likely. And one of the questions we must ask ourselves through this, not just this evening, but throughout this weekend and frankly, going forward, is are we making elementary errors? Could that be why we're not doing as well as we should? And certainly as kingdom citizens, I want to challenge us. The other thing that should encourage us is that it turns out that you don't need everybody to be on board to make an impact. That even a small group of people can make an impact. I'm sure some of you have had a great quotation from this, credited to this lady, Margaret Mead, that says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." A very contrarian point, because at times, and there are many things we say in Nigeria, and I don't want to, digress too much today. But you know the way we talk about it, everybody has come on board, everybody, some people are, it turns out it's not the case. It's actually a core group of small people. Large numbers may even be discouraged. You know the story of Gideon's army and all that. I don't want to, start preaching. But my point is, it's very important that we understand that, like, a little with God is much. A small group of people partnering with God can transform Nigeria. As big as it is, as complex as it sounds, it doesn't need everybody to be on the same page. And then one of my most important principles that I know you will agree with me on is the power of compound interest, particularly in the context of time. In the context of time. That there is something about consistency and letting time work for you. Letting time work for you. People get anxious. People got shot. Wanting to cut corners. I've lost. The best thing that can happen to a man or to anybody that wants to accomplish something major or something noble or something enduring is to let time work for you. In any event, God works in the process of time. And there are many examples of this, but one of the examples is the story of, David and King Saul. The Bible says there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. Well, David waxed stronger over time. And eventually, you know the story. And I want to encourage us, because at times people put you under pressure. I like sharing stories, so I'll be sharing stories as I go along. I was interviewed by Richard Quest, when he came here. And I remember the man saying to me, but you guys are running out of time. What are you going to do now? I said, to him that, who said we are running out of time? You do what you can, and then you hand it over to somebody else. You have to work in the process of time. It's a dangerous trap to fall into this thing if I don't get it done like yesterday. Particularly, why do you want to limit God? Because one thing when it comes to a life of faith that God likes us to have is also patience. We have need of patience, and after we've done his will, we'll then receive the reward. So I just want to encourage us that let's do the right thing. Even if it looks like it will take longer. God will surprise us. And I'm sure that we'll get there. Now, of course, there's already, from the program I saw, a lot of work and a lot of discussion will take place around these kingdom impact spheres. But I thought I will add this. I know this is a topic that a number of us here have been studying. And so I don't intend to belabor this point. But it's important to always remember that, we don't have to be everywhere at the same time. We all need to pull together. I was in the business and economy, and I've been invited into public service government. And it's a real sort of a privilege and honor to serve our country in that space. But we need everybody. At times we talk about government as if it can just go and do it by itself. And at times those of us that are in government then accept as if you are being set up. When somebody says that, like, you government, you should fix the country. But we have to work together, particularly from, with the other spheres of society. And it's also important for Christians, for those of us that are Christians, to always remember that, yes, in this journey of faith on earth, Christ has said to us, occupy till I come. In other words, we have to get on with the work. We have to get on with the work of the kingdom. And there is so much that God wants us to do on earth. And we must accept responsibility for doing it. But what I thought I would do is speak to 2 or 3 of these spheres where I have functioned in or where I've had some experience, just by way of putting it in context. Since government is where I am now, I thought I would start with that. And these things I'm sharing with you are the meditations of my heart, the longings in my heart. This is not an attempt to be exhaustive or to be scientific about the subject. No. The things that are, I would say almost of utmost interest to me are the things I'm talking about. One of them is, I really think we need to change the conversation. I think we are falling into a trap as a people. The way, if you look at all the conversations going on in Nigeria, I don't have anything against restructuring. I don't have anything against addressing the issue of marginalization. I don't have anything against, people demanding more from their government, asking for equity and fairness. Those things are very important. But I do believe that, like, one of the other things that we need, and we are best positioned to do it, those of us that are, have been renewed, our minds have been renewed, is a new tribe. We call it a new tribe of people who have a common set of values that can really build a nation. Values like integrity. Values like other-centeredness. People that love their neighbor. You know what? I'm not people who are just basically, incredibly selfish. No matter how well positioned the argument is. These things don't impress God. Man is the one that is impressed by the outward appearance. But I think if we can think in terms of excellence, that Olympic mindset, integrity, hard work, just the time-honored values that the Protestant values, the values that built the kingdom and that will build this kingdom here too. I think we can actually get something done. And even for those of us that are in government, I believe we have to lead by example. And that's what every time I give this kind of talk, I always make the point that I am not asking you to do it. I start with myself. This is the way I want to operate. This is the life I want to live. And this is how I want to be measured. Meaning what I say, saying what I mean, and frankly, being interested in how you can be a blessing to somebody else. Not arguing why you owe me, or that entitlement mindset. The other way to think about it is that we need reformers, particularly in government. And the number of us that I would even say are reformers. The question is, do we have critical mass? What should we be doing to recruit more people? And I believe that this, weekend, this whole kingdom, partnering for kingdom impact, and the whole thing that we're doing here is part of it. In fact, I came in with His Excellency the Vice President, and, I shared my slides with him. And he asked me, how do we recruit this? How does this thing become real? And I get my answer for at least this evening will be, it starts from here. We must recruit the people that are here now. Instead of going to look for them somewhere else. Why don't we start with this audience? And then those will be here tomorrow, and hopefully if he's able to come, and when he's able to come on Sunday. But my point is, it would really be nice if we can, be reformers, both in government and in terms of our own spheres and areas of influence. And I am now fully convinced and persuaded that government has to be about service. I'm not saying it doesn't answer public service, civil service, but it's so easy to get caught up in the whole. It's a bit like the disciples of Jesus. The way they were saying, who will be the greatest? And he said, whoever will be the servant is the greatest. We need to go back to that. And some of these deep principles that Christ taught, they sound religious, but when you try them out, they actually work. I tell people, just use myself as an example, that nothing gives me more encouragement, nothing keeps me going in terms of inspiration than just thinking that I'm public service. Just the fact that the same way somebody who wins an Olympic medal for his country, you can imagine these footballers that won this going to the World Cup. I'm sure they were feeling 10 feet tall. They just were feeling that they did something for this country, whether you know it or not. We did that for you. Take it from us. I feel public service should be the same way. One should feel honored that you're serving your country. You've been asked to come and help. And it's a privilege. Like David said, is it a light thing to marry the king's daughter? So I'm hoping that that will inspire more people. Because there's almost an assumption that if you're in service, that the only thing that motivates maybe is money or maybe is something else. But, think about the ancient kingdoms like Greece, where honor, people killed for honor, they died for honor, they would have been willing to die just so that they'll be honored. May God help us in Jesus' name. And ultimately, what are we seeking to be? We want to use the biblical examples of the lives of Joseph, of Daniel, people who actually made a difference, serving God and serving man. And that's what we should be doing, those of us that are in government and those of us that are in service. Now, I wanted to then talk a bit about the economy as well. And when it comes to the economy, again, like I said, I'll keep repeating the same point. I am dealing with the meditations of my heart. I don't know, when the panel comes, I'm sure you'll get more technical, you'll get, and all that. But let me deal with the things that I, that really I'm deeply interested in. God spoke to me in 2010, I'm sure I've shared it here, and said to me that if you will find apostles of righteousness, meaning champions, people who actually believe in righteousness, that you can do it and do it well, that he will bless them. Just to make the point that you can still serve God and succeed in the marketplace. And this is, and I believe he's still recruiting, because there is no question that a lot of us in the marketplace have believed or have been caught in this trap that unless you follow them, you are basically not going to make it, at least in terms of prosperity and material well-being. That you may succeed somewhere, but you won't make it. Now, we need to think in terms of, have we actually given God a chance in our lives? Just out of the integrity of our heart, saying, I'll do things properly to see what God will do. Now, let me give you practical examples of this. And some of these people are not even people who claim to be religious. This same book, Seeking Wisdom, that I was reading, that was recommended to me, these guys are billionaires. Warren Buffett is one of the wealthiest people in the world. And they were talking about how they made it. And, the kind of qualities they were talking about, integrity, they just think it's too much headache to be cheating and lying. And they said it's too hard. No, not interested. They just said that, and they said they bat over time. In other words, they took opportunities as they came over the long haul. And compound interest worked for them. And I still think that those principles of prosperity, we need to try them. And we must, Pastor Ben, I was going to say that we must continue. I know that this is an area you've been teaching on. We must continue to teach and emphasize and challenge ourselves. Because I don't believe that this has been tried enough. All societies where people have prospered, you will find that the prosperity that endured were those that follow the principles of prosperity as God has, stated them for us to follow. And when we do, the results will come. Warren Buffett, for instance, says that when he's hiring people or businesses or whatever, he looks for 3 things: integrity, competence, energy. We talk about Daniel and his spirit of wisdom and how he was 10 times better than his peers. Who says that if we... Did I press something? Who says that if we do these things, that... thank you. That if we do these things, that we won't prosper. So I just really want to challenge us. Let this not be academic. Whatever we're going to discuss, however we're going to do it, let's go back to the basics. This is a burden I carry, because I honestly believe, based on my own experience, which though limited, that if we will try this thing, it works. The Bible says, come and taste and see that the Lord is good. If we will try this thing, it works. There are principles, there are ways of doing things. I went for Atedo Peter Side's send-off by Stanbic. This guy, again, Christian, I don't know whether he's Pentecostal or not, but I know he's a Christian. And one of the things that struck me about him, about the testimonies that were said about him, is that he is so finicky about integrity. It was said in so many ways. And I said, no wonder this guy dominated his generation, banking generation, when it comes to prosperity. Even IBTC itself, whether you love Stanbic or hate them, you know that in their DNA, as far as banking is concerned, that they're a lot more honorable. And it's because a man chose to build a business based on what he believed in. First, he prospered, and the bank is also prospering. But why aren't more Christians trying it? God will help us. Let me now talk a bit about family, because I had actually made this point, so I'll be very quick here. I just don't know if we take marriage and family seriously enough. Just in terms of when you get it right, what it means, when you get it wrong, what it means. I think I was talking to a different audience somewhere, and we're talking about relationship with my wife, and and actually they were relating it to her work. But where the point ended up, and what I want to remember, is that by forming a partnership, it has helped me, in whether it's now having to work in public service in Abuja, or maybe having to raise children who are in school all over. There is nothing like, when you have a partnership between two people that are committed to each other and committed to a certain set of goals that they want to accomplish together, they can do a lot. But the question is that, do we give it the weight it deserves in terms of all the challenges that marriage can throw at us, so that we make up our minds that this marriage must work because it's tied to my destiny, it's tied to impact, it's tied to any number of other things. And like one of our mentors, again, the Kramer used to tell us, he said, whenever people, do not honor that partnership in marriage, that they see it spilling over everywhere else. I mean, there's a way he put it, but that's really in essence what he was saying. Because it's the most basic of partnerships. And it's important that we at least try and make that work. It's also part of these spheres of influence, family, because that's what underpins raising children and all the other things. And the principles of marriage work everywhere else. Alignment of interest. The Bible says 2 are better than 1. But it also says 2 shall become 1. And all those things, when you take them together, it begins to tell you why marriage is so important. Of course, I've made the point that God hates divorce. And you know how important the family unit is to God. And when this thing is undermined, by the way, when marriage is undermined, it basically undermines our impact. That's why I believe, as we say in church at times, that this is a work of the enemy. The enemy has sown these tares and is really trying to make sure we don't accomplish God's will for our lives. Now, as I begin to close, let me then spend a few minutes talking about what are we actually doing? Because every opportunity we get, we must come back to this idea of sharing with you what's going on. What I decided to do was, I hope you can see them, to highlight some of the priorities of government that I think are actually on their way. Everything will not be accomplished in a hurry, like I said earlier. But I have been talking to God, talking to myself, and saying, Father, let these things be built on a solid foundation. Because we're not really looking for personal glory here. What we want is for Nigeria to work and to work over time. I'm very contrarian, and some of you will know. So I generally challenge conventional wisdom. So when people ask me questions that are like it's obvious that everything, if you don't complete everything, you would have failed, I say, well, who said so? Just go and look at how God builds. Look at Christ when he was leaving the earth. He looked like a failure. Crucified, disciples, ran all over the place. Basically, this movement looked like it was dead. And yet, God's ways are not our ways. We must lay a solid foundation. But let me come back to the government and our initiatives. One of the most important things we're doing is around the Industrial Council, because it's a public-private partnership for industrialization and for impact. All these things I can talk to you more about later. There are a number of priorities we're working on: infrastructure, skills, financing, policy, market access. We also want to build special economic zones. Why? Because it turns out that if you really want to help people compete, you have to give them the conditions. And since you can't do it everywhere, why don't we select some areas and make sure that we actually have those zones working? And thanks to Pastor Ben, who is the Director General of Budget, he's given us a budget to do it. And if the National Assembly allows us, then it will be done. Of course, the big glue, and I talked about it earlier, is the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. That plan is key because that's our own attempt to articulate what we're doing. And for me, the priority is actually implementation, just like I started with. We also have the whole Enabling Environment Initiative, chaired by the Vice President under the Presidential Council, called the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC. He has a secretariat called IBIS. I'm sure you know about this. He just launched a second action plan to focus on some priorities over the next 60 days, starting from the beginning of this month. There are many other public-private initiatives we'd like to see. You've heard about the concession of the airports. That's a process that is underway. We hope it will lead to much better airports and make Nigeria more competitive. We are working on exports, and the whole idea is to work with the states and with exporters to say what exactly is hindering your exports so we can solve the problems and move ahead. This is an initiative of the Nigerian Economic Council, which, the council where the states meet with the federal government. The other thing we've been focusing on is micro, small, and medium enterprises, and there are several initiatives there, ranging from the government social intervention funds, including the ones for artisans and market women, where we give them, low interest credit, to a program sponsored by the World Bank that our ministry oversees called the Growth and Employment Project, which is basically we're going to have a private equity fund. We're doing some grants to people and capacity building and so on. There's also the MSME clinics. This is an attempt to take the regulators who should really be serving SMEs to them. So for instance, they will be in Kano. When I say there, we will be in Kano, but it's my minister of state that will go with the vice president. He always goes on Tuesday. We've been to a number of states in the southeast, southwest, north, and so on. So the point is that there is a lot that is going on, and I hope that they will get the results. After all, we're talking about Africa here, I thought at least I would deal with one important initiative that is an African initiative, the Continental Free Trade Area negotiations, which is an attempt to say, if you look at the Africa trade, intra-Africa trade, it's actually quite small, just between maybe 10-15% or so. Most other parts of the world, the minimum, you're talking about 30-40%, most of them are at 60%. In other words, people trade with their neighbors and grow that way. But in Africa, because of infrastructure, because of all kinds of challenges, we haven't done so. So there's an attempt to do that, and the summit of the African Union, which is the highest where the heads of state meet, have actually asked the trade ministers, of which I'm one, to basically come up with an agreement, a framework agreement on how African countries can work better together to trade more among themselves. And we're taking it very seriously. Nigeria is actually chairing it, and we have a chief negotiator that has been doing an excellent job doing that. And one of the most important mandates we have in our ministry is to attract investments, both foreign and local, domestic investments to oil the economy. And as you know, we recently, or not even recently, it's now over a year, I guess, appointed a new head for the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission. Now, in the interest of time, I really can't go into details here, but I thought I'll give you ideas what we're working on. I'll be happy to meet with you because Pastor Ben funds the budget. He probably knows more about these things than most people. One of the things that I find amazing, and I don't mean to put Pastor Ben on the spot, but the way he quotes figures, it's incredible. He said that number 2.344567 billion is for XYZ. I think it's an asset to the country. Thank you, King's Court, for donating it to us. No, seriously, There is nothing like when a person is good at what he does. It's a gift. I'm telling you, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. And even if I say so myself, Pastor Ben has been a real blessing to us. So let me conclude with just a few thoughts. Even if you take nothing away this weekend, let's reflect on this power of partnership. Whether it's partnership in your marriage, how is it working? Or even the partnership that we should be. I tell you, there are many forces that will try to disunite you. If I share my personal testimonies, you'll be amazed. But thank God that God spoke to me. The Holy Spirit speaks to us, as you know. God said to me, do not squander my grace. When he said initially, I didn't fully understand. Then I started to meditate. And I realized what he was telling me, that temptations are coming. Fights will start showing up from everywhere. People will offend you. People will do naughty things. But if you follow it, just know that you're not going to accomplish what I sent you to do. So I made up my mind, and I've been preaching it just to myself and to others. I will not squander the grace of God. You're not going to catch me with any strife. I'm not doing it. No. I just won't do it. I want us to partner and make this thing work. And a small group can get a lot done. Of course, I've talked about the importance of, really getting on with this kingdom business, which is what this seminar is all about and what this summit is all about. And, the other thing is that I want us to be part of a new tribe that will change the conversation. And we can. If people like Chineye, who is here, decides to change the conversation, he can. When we were in school, he was a major player in terms of changing conversations. I don't know what he's doing. He's been silent. I hope more of us will be, we'll just speak up. Seriously. Because I think this contrarian thought that we must not continue the conventional discussions or conversations that are not leading us anywhere. Let me share one more. I promise to share only one with you. If you want to live a life of misery, let me share another one with you from the same book. It says one thing that will guarantee you a life of misery is resentment. If you want to be miserable, resent your neighbor. Live a life of resentment. Guess what all this dialogue is about? It's about resentment. People want to make us miserable. And we don't know it. And we're falling into the trap. It doesn't matter whether my neighbor offended me or not. Why do I want to live a life of resentment? Researchers said if you want a life of misery, guaranteed, 100%, live a life of resentment. And in Nigeria, if we're not careful, so a new tribe must arise that will say no to resentment, yes to being our brother's keeper. I call it other-centeredness. Be contrarian. Say, look after your neighbor. One last thought before I sit down. In game theory, these are all, from different fields. In game theory, one of the most important findings in game theory, do you know that, and they use husbands and wives as an example, and this is something you say love is reciprocal, so that's where I'm going. But it tells us they will play a game with you and say, if you've ever disagreed with your wife, just call her up and say to her, honey, I've thought about this and it was my fault. And you legitimately say why you think so. You give your reasons, not, you can't fool your wife. So you have to say what you did wrong very, very well. She will come back and tell you why it's also her fault. If you go and tell your neighbor, this is how I've wronged you, he'll tell you how he has wronged you. But tell him what he has done wrong, why he's the one owing you, he'll tell you why you're the one owing him. And the conversation will continue. And they will see who will end up being indebted to who. So we must move from the conversation of you owe me to here is what I owe you and I will pay. And then you see what you get in return. So as I sit down, please let us partner to deliver the Nigeria and Africa of our dreams. Thank you very much.